right, so the agenda of today's session is onboarding endpoints in CrowdStrike Falcon security. So what we are focusing right now is on CrowdStrike Falcon security. And when it comes to CrowdStrike Falcon security, we are focusing on endpoint security. CrowdStrike has multiple modules. Endpoint security is one of them. We have Insight module, we have identity security posture management, cloud security posture management, next generation SIEM, IoT security, AI security. There are many modules. Overwatch module is there. Threat hunting and automation module is there. So there are multiple modules. Currently, our focus is on endpoint security, endpoint protection platform. And then we will look at detection and response capabilities also. So when it comes to onboarding endpoints in CrowdStrike security, we were primarily focusing on Windows. And when it comes to Windows, we were focusing both on client and server OS, and then Linux. Now, when I say Linux, there could be any distribution that you would like to onboard into CrowdStrike, Falcon, cloud instance. However, you need to make sure that since Linux has various distros, when I say distros, it basically means distribution. And the most common distribution for Linux are Ubuntu, Red Hat, CentOS, SUSE, which is primarily used in enterprise grade environments, and Amazon Linux. There are many more. However, these are the most common. So, for example, when it comes to uh, enterprises or large corporates, you will find they primarily use either SUSE or Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Why do they use this Linux versions? Because they are tested, they are trusted, and they are on offer from businesses who have been into existence for a long time, and they have a good customer following. So Red Hat and SUSE. Then you also have Ubuntu. You also have CentOS. Ubuntu and CentOS has mixed use case wherein businesses use them as well as home users, individuals, they also use these operating systems. Then we have some additional Linux distributions which are primarily used in cybersecurity world for learning, for testing, research and development, or testing, personal testing or personal learning, as well as for performing proof of concept. For example, Kali Linux. That's another Linux distribution that we use. So the process to onboard, if it is Windows or Linux, would remain the same. There could be a slight change in the process when it comes to onboarding a Linux distribution. Linux distributions, depending on the distribution type, the package, you may end up choosing a different package. There could be some additional commands that you may need to execute. So let's get started, guys. So we will start with endpoint onboarding. Now, when it comes to endpoint onboarding, all were stuck with two things, which is tokens. So this was a concept that I introduced when I recorded the video and sent it to you. I actually talked about tokens. Now, what are these tokens? There are two types of tokens that we use in CrowdStrike. First is installation token, and second is maintenance token. Installation token and maintenance token. Installation token primarily helps you onboard an endpoint into CrowdStrike Cloud instance, respective CrowdStrike Cloud instance. So every customer of CrowdStrike, they are using CrowdStrike services. CrowdStrike services are deployed in CrowdStrike respective data centers, and those services are offered to end users and customers via SaaS delivery model, software as a service delivery model, wherein you can consume the services through a browser-based interface. So you will be provided access to a specific CrowdStrike instance. We have instances in US, East US, West Europe, and Asia Pacific. So you will be provided access to those instances. Once you have access to an instance, you will also be recognized by a unique customer ID. through which your relationship with CrowdStrike, will execute in the long run. And every deployment that you do that would go against your customer ID. So CrowdStrike at the end of the day would know how many customers do I have in a specific region, how many endpoints have they onboarded in their respective instance, in their respective account, and how I need to bill them at the end of the year when their, when it is the time for renewal of their services. So that's customer ID, which is a unique number. Now, other than customer ID, so customer ID is there is a unique customer ID for each customer. Now, imagine a customer who has multiple business units, multiple departments, and the customer has multiple operations. They have, and they also are involved into multiple industry verticals. So the customer is into retail, customer is into e-commerce, customer is into finance, customer is into FMCG, customer is into aviation and probably manufacturing also. So there are multiple industry vertical. Now, how do you manage the show? At the end of the day, as I informed you the other day, we have certain factors that needs to be taken into account. So what are these factors? When you design endpoint security solution for a customer, you take into account certain factors. Now, these factors are location constraints, or I would say compliances and regulations. So we have regulations and compliances based on different locations that the customer has business or customer is doing business. So, for example, in Europe, you have GDPR. In Middle East or in Middle East, you have KSA. In North America, you have CCPA. In India, you have DPDP. And similarly, most of the countries in the world, they have their own respective data privacy regulations and compliances. So we have location constraint. That's first factor that we need to figure out. Then we need to understand the organizational structure or customer or organizational structure. Structure basically means whether they are centralized or decentralized entities. Whether the customer has one team that manages everything, or whether the customer has separate teams, separate cost center, and each cost center or each business unit of department has their own flexibility to onboard tools and services and pay for them. So centralized and decentralized entities. That's another factor that you need to take into consideration while designing the solution. Similarly, there will be additional factors, which is networking, networking architecture, how customer has architected the networking solutions, whether the entities are running in isolation, whether these entities are connected to one another and they have the capability to share data and information. So networking architecture, which basically means isolated or shared, right? Similarly, there will be additional factors that you need to take into account, which is so based on these factors, we design the solution. Now, let's talk about a customer who is multi region, multi business units, and multi industry verticals. For this customer, you're going to deploy CrowdStrike. So you know that we know the deployment options that I can deploy. I can download and install Falcon sensor on the endpoint, and the sensor will then start to collect telemetry data from that endpoint based on the instructions that it will receive. Instructions basically means policies and configurations which are done by admin on the cloud instance, and it will do its job. That's what we understand. So when it comes to token, we have two types of token. The first is installation token. Now the purpose of installation token to isolate, protect, and it also helps in maintenance responsibilities, etc. So installation token is an additional layer you must have noticed when you onboarded endpoints into CrowdStrike console, you were supposed to provide the customer ID. And then it said installation token and it said optional. So it is optional to provide installation token, but we make it mandatory in business because we want to make sure that in the event of our customer ID is revealed, is known to everyone, there should not be any threat or attack in our environment wherein threat actors are onboarding additional endpoints into our environment. Because if they know your customer ID, then they can onboard any endpoint into your console. And if you have strange endpoints or endpoints which are not known to you, there is a high probability that your environment will be compromised, right? Your environment will be compromised, or threat actors will be quick to know the security configuration of your environment. So if they are able to, if they have access to your customer ID and if they onboard an endpoint into your console, the endpoint will behave as per the policies and configurations. So threat actors would be quick to know that what kind of configurations or policies you have put into your into your CrowdStrike console, or how are you managing the security of your endpoints. They will be quick to know that you have created a device control policy through which you have blocked certain vendors of removable devices or certain hardware IDs. They will be quick to know that you have blocked certain URLs and websites. So this information will really help them to probably execute an attack on your environment, because they would know what not to try, what not to waste time on, because that's already blocked. So they'll probably look for options which are not blocked. So it's a threat. So to overcome this threat, to address the security concern, we basically have the concept of installation token. So installation token is an additional layer of security similar to multi-factor authentication that will ensure that the endpoint is getting onboarded in the right customer account. Installation token will also help you in isolation. Isolation basically means that if your business comprises of multiple business units and departments, and if they need flexibility to onboard their respective endpoints, you can generate an installation token, share it with them, and let them onboard their endpoints. You will always know which endpoint is onboarded using which installation token. In other way, you would know which endpoint belongs to which business unit or department. That's another flexibility that you get. Next flexibility is maintenance responsibilities. So since endpoint needs maintenance, endpoint generates detection. Those detection needs to be addressed. Incident needs to be investigated and remediated. If you follow decentralized entities, wherein each business unit, department, country, or location has their own support functions. So with the help of installation token, since you have already segregated the endpoints based on installation token onboarding, the maintenance responsibility will always be smooth. They would know the detection when the detection is generated in the console, they would be able to pick in, remediate or investigate the incident which belongs to their respective endpoints, not to all the endpoints. So that's the purpose of installation token, that it helps you separate, isolate, and segregate the management or maintenance responsibilities within the business unit and function, and it provides an additional layer of security. That's installation token. Then comes another type of token, which is maintenance token. Now, during the life cycle of an endpoint, while it is onboarded into CrowdStrike console, there will be a number of incidents wherein you will need to decommission the endpoint. So what if you need to decommission? Decommission basically means deboard. So you onboard the endpoint, the opposite of deboard. The endpoint uh, is not needed by the organization, or the endpoint is getting deprecated. The application is getting deprecated, which is hosted on that endpoint, and you don't need to protect it anymore. So you cannot just delete the server and forget about it. No, it will continue to appear in CrowdStrike console, and it will continue to occupy one endpoint license. I've already informed that license or pricing that you pay to CrowdStrike is based on the number of endpoints that you onboard. Whether you manage them, whether those endpoints after onboarding are healthy, not healthy, CrowdStrike has nothing to do with that. They will continue to bill you for the endpoints which are onboarded into the console. So if there are times when you need to, let's say, repair the installation due to certain patching activities or update activities, CrowdStrike is not working as expected. Or maybe a sensor update activity has corrupted the CrowdStrike deployment on the endpoint, and you want to repair the deployment. If you want to repair it, it would require a maintenance token. If you want to decommission, uninstall, if you want to uninstall or decommission, it would require a maintenance token. So the maintenance token would be required before you modify any configuration of CrowdStrike Falcon sensor on the endpoint. That's what we use maintenance token for. Now, in what scenario maintenance token will help you with? Maintenance token will help you with securing the endpoint because it will avoid tampering. So it will avoid tampering of Falcon sensor. So if a threat actor gains access to your endpoint by way of lateral movement, by way of brute force attack, by way of an identity compromise, or by way of a privileged escalation, the threat actor, which means a hacker, is able to gain access to your system. Now, the first thing that they would do is to disable the endpoint security so that they can freely execute certain commands, certain malicious code into your endpoint. And for that, they will need to uninstall the Falcon sensor or stop the Falcon sensor service, basically tamper with the configuration. So the maintenance token will protect the Falcon sensor deployment on the endpoint from tampering perspective. That's the maintenance token. So we have installation token, we have maintenance token. Is everyone with me on this? Any question from any participant before we move on to the deployment part?
Raghu, can you explain what is tampering here? What type of tampering is?
What type of?
Tampering you are saying, it's a tamper protection means nobody will change the configuration, something like that.
Absolutely. Repair. Nobody can repair it. Nobody can uninstall it. Nobody can close the CrowdStrike Falcon service or disable the Falcon service for a couple of minutes. For example, you have a VPN solution on your corporate endpoints. You have the capability to disconnect from the VPN. While the endpoint remains disconnected from the VPN, endpoint is partially protected because through VPN, it is also receiving a lot of security configuration. But in this case, you will not be able to disable the CrowdStrike sensor or CrowdStrike or respective corresponding services that powers the sensor. So the endpoint user or a threat actor who by any means gained access to the endpoint will not be able to do any configuration changes of the Falcon sensor, will not be able to manipulate the configuration, will not be able to delete the sensor, uninstall the sensor, repair the sensor. That is known as avoid tampering. Make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Let's move on. Okay. So let's
Raghu,
go ahead.
Raghu,
Yes.
Raghu, one more question here.
Mhm.
Since it's a token and it comes with the expiry date, right? 30 days, 90 days, 1 year. So maintenance of these token, do we have any mechanism from CrowdStrike where we can get the notification or we can get the expiry, something like through email or any notification on the portal?
For installation token, I have not seen CrowdStrike providing notification. However, there are configurations wherein you can provide an email address or a distribution list DL that will enable CrowdStrike to provide notifications in the event of detections when they are generated in the console. in the event of any severe activity that happens, in the event of CrowdStrike wanting to inform you about some changes, you will continue to receive notifications. But for maintenance tokens or installation tokens, I have not seen that. However, you can always configure automation through which you will be notified, or CrowdStrike Falcon admins, it is their responsibility to ensure that maintenance tokens are renewed. Now, once a installation tokens are renewed. So when you generate an installation token, you basically define the duration for that installation token. So if I navigate to host setup and management and click on installation token over here, okay. So I see a couple of installation tokens. Now, if I need to add a installation token, I'll just provide a token name. It's more of a security configurations. It's like an encryption key, and I'll select the duration. Now, when I select the duration for this installation token, the installation token will expire as per this duration, and it will not be used. It cannot be used for endpoint onboarding. So if the installation token expires, definitely the team or the person or the entity which is using that installation token will come back to you and say that we are not able to onboard endpoints. So we need a new installation token. You don't renew the installation token. You will say that you need a new installation token. Now, for any installation token, which is, for example, this installation token is right now revoked, I can make it active. I can hit edit, and then I can change the duration. So it says keep original expiration, or I can create additional expiration, or for some installation token, I can say doesn't expire, depending on who I am handing those installation tokens to. Okay. All right. So that's
Okay.
installation token. Similarly, hang on. Similarly, we also have maintenance tokens. So maintenance token, you will not see it from here. Maintenance token will be shown from the endpoint itself. So what are we going to do? We are going to onboard an endpoint today. Once the endpoint is onboarded, I'll show you the maintenance token concept also. Right now, I'm going to disable this installation token, or I'm going to revoke this installation token. Okay, then comes,
So,
so
Raghu, I have one question. So, it
yeah,
will ask during the installation if I make it mandatory. So, it will ask during the installation or not.
if obviously if you see you can't make it mandatory, because in order to make installation token mandatory for deployment of endpoints or for deployment of Falcon sensor, there has to be at least one active installation token. For example, if I try to make it mandatory, you can see I'm getting an error. It says token setting could not be saved. Why? Because I don't have a single active installation token. All of them are revoked. Make sense?
Yes. So, because yesterday I was make it mandatory, okay, and I installed without any tokens. It get
Mm-hmm.
installed after
Mm-hmm.
making it the mandatory. That's why I'm asking these questions.
No, no. If you make it mandatory, by design, you should provide an installation token. Otherwise, even if it says installed, the endpoint will not appear in the console. Endpoint will not get registered with the respective customer ID, and you will need to run a separate command. Whether it is Windows, then it's command line. If it is Linux, then it is Linux CLI. Unless
But
you
it,
run that command, it will not
but
appear in the console.
sorry, but it's appearing in the detections monitoring sections, but not it's showing in the host dashboard, but it's monitoring detection center is showing.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. There could be there could be a gap in the product. I'm saying there are times when you're able to do something which is not allowed. which is against the design of the solution. And there had been a number of examples. However, I'm going by the documentation, I'm going by the design. The design clearly says, the architecture clearly says that if installation token have been mandated, they must be provided at the time of installation. If you do not provide the token, the installation will not be successful, because when the sensor will try to communicate with the Falcon cloud instance by providing the customer ID, the cloud instance will basically verify whether the installation tokens are mandatory. If yes, whether this Falcon sensor is providing the installation token. If it doesn't provide, you should not be able to onboard the endpoint. Either the onboarding will fail, or the onboarding will show as successful because that is more of a UI, but the endpoint will not be registered into the console. That's how the design and architecture says. Now, there are always exceptions that we can discuss, probably offline. Okay. Now, for
So there
example,
are,
you see, guys, that I have made one installation token as active. Out of 16 installation tokens which are there, I have made one installation token as active. If I, you know, turn this setting off, which is if I make the installation token mandatory, it should work now. See, I was able to make it mandatory because at least one installation token was active. Now, while I onboard an endpoint, I will need to provide this installation token, this code. If I don't provide this code, my endpoint onboarding will not succeed. If the token has expired, so the question from Siddharth is, if the token has expired, what will be the impact? If the token expires and if required token setting is turned on, you will not be able to onboard endpoint. If we create a new token, will it affect the performance of any existing agent? Absolutely not. Installation token are like multi-factor authentication. It's an additional factor authentication. Once you are there in the system, you will continue to remain there in the system unless your token expires, unless your session expires. So once, even if the installation token expires, the endpoint which was onboarded using that installation token will continue to remain healthy, up and running in the console. However, no additional endpoints will be onboarded into the console. See, why installation tokens are provided? Because in this training, I have granted you all Falcon admin role. But in the production environment, there will be a handful of people who will have Falcon admin role. And who are responsible for onboarding endpoints? Your infrastructure team, your Wintel team, your Linux team, they are responsible for endpoint onboarding because they have access to the infrastructure. You are not onboarding endpoints, you are just supervising it. You are just supporting them. So while they onboard endpoint, they don't have access to the console. Their job is to just create a package, they push it to the endpoint so that they are onboarding. So that is where they would need installation token. So you just supply an installation token to them along with customer ID and say, here are two pieces of information that you need to package so that you're able to onboard endpoints. Because they don't have access to the console. They don't know whether the installation token is active, what is the expiration date of that installation token, whether the installation token have been mandated by the administrator. They absolutely have no visibility into it. So always remember, training environment is different from production environment because training environment provides you more flexibility and production is all about restrictions. However, training environment gives you an opportunity to explore and think of use cases and put them to implementation. So you have less trouble in production environment. Your production environment runs smooth. That is why we use a training environment with very minimum or no restrictions. Okay. So, Hardik, any
so
question? I see your hands are raised.
yeah,
Yeah,
yep.
please.
So so I just wanted to reconfirm my understanding. So instant for onboarding a sensor, we need two things. One is customer ID, which is
Mhm.
mandatory, whereas if we mandate require token, then token is required as a two-factor authentication. So my question is, once the token gets expired, right? Since this is the second layer of protection, uh, will our onboarded devices continue to get the security patches or security configuration and it will behave as it is? or we need to replace the token again?
I just explained it that it will have no impact on the
Mhm.
devices which are already onboarded. However, the devices that are yet to get onboarded will not be onboarded because your token expired and it has been mandated by admin to supply a token during endpoint onboarding.
Okay,
Hope
got
that
it.
answers
Thank
you.
you, sir. Yep,
Okay,
yep.
somebody asked Sunil, is there any limit on how many installation tokens we can use? It's there on the console itself. You can see 16 out of 50. So you can have up to 50 installation tokens generated. Shall we need to create individual tokens for each agent on it, or is it a common for all agents for same client? Absolutely. You can have one installation token for the entire ecosystem, or you can have separate installation token created for each business unit and department, or probably for each location, because CrowdStrike instance will remain the same. So you can create a separate installation token for each location, for each business unit and department, or you can have two separate installation token, one for production, one for non-production, or one for your legacy applications or compliance applications. This is just an arrangement to enhance the security of endpoints. How do you want to leverage it is totally your discretion, and it differs from one customer to another based on size, scale, and complexity. Okay, Shyam, any question? All right, let's move
Yeah,
on,
Raghu,
guys.
I have one question, Jaydeep, this side. So,
Mhm, yes, sir.
Sorry.
thing is that this customer ID for like, we are using this common Falcon, right? So, so for all of us, the customer ID is same or different?
Same. You all have access to the same console because
So whatever customer ID is showing in my portal, it will be same for all, right?
for all who all the
Or
other
like all
participants.
means like other participant?
Yeah, absolutely. You all have been granted access to the same console. Your
Hmm.
access is configured based on the endpoint licenses, number of endpoints that you guys can onboard, and you all have been granted Falcon admin access. Because in the backend, there is an instance which is running, and that instance is quite expensive. So one customer, one portal, one instance. It cannot happen that one customer has multiple instances. However, each customer has an instance which is highly available and scalable. So if I continue to onboard more and more endpoints, now a customer who has 10 endpoints has an instance. A customer who has 10,000 endpoints also has an instance. The configuration of that instance will differ from one customer to another, but each customer has a separate instance. So we are customers customer of CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike has provided us with an instance to run these training sessions. Okay. All right. Let's
Uh,
move on, guys.
Sorry,
And I
Anil,
will
just a
probably
quick
keep
one.
your questions with you because it might be able to proceed further. So let's probably complete one topic and then we can spend some time in, you know, in taking your questions and answering them. Otherwise, this will continue to run. Okay. So So I've talked about installation token concept. Maintenance token concept I'll talk about when we have an endpoint onboarded. I'm saying an endpoint that I have access to. I cannot touch your endpoint as as a discipline or as a best practice. You will not be allowed to tamper with, modify, or you know manipulate the configuration of others endpoint, and that's how I have made certain arrangements in this console. And this arrangement also reflects a production environment wherein there are multiple teams. They have their respective endpoints and they are only allowed to deal with those endpoints. They're not allowed to access, view, or modify the endpoints that belongs to other teams or other departments or other locations. Same is the case here. So, for example, you guys will not be able to tamper with or modify the configuration of endpoints which belongs to other participants. So I have made that arrangement in this console to segregate your endpoint with others. All right. Now, the first thing that we need to understand is onboarding methods. What are my different onboarding methods that I will use to onboard endpoints? So onboarding methods. When I need to onboard endpoints in CrowdStrike console, there are multiple onboarding methods, and the choice of an onboarding method differs from customer to customer, and it is also dictated by the number of endpoints or nature of endpoints that you are onboarding. For example, when it comes to endpoints, we have different types of endpoints. As I said, we have Linux endpoints and we have Windows endpoints. So we have Linux and Windows endpoints primarily, or I would say, let's say Windows, Mac, and Linux endpoints. Now the count of these endpoints could be 10, 100, 1000, 10,000, or 100,000. These are the count of the endpoints. It can go like this. Okay, now the placement of these endpoints, these are all factors that will affect the choice of onboarding methods. The endpoint placement. Placement basically means geography of these endpoints, whether the endpoints are running in isolated networks. So geography, isolated networks, as well as relationship of these endpoints, whether they are related with one another or not. For example, there are two endpoints and they are not related to each other. They belong to two separate applications. Or there are two endpoints which are part of the same application ecosystem. So endpoint, and then application environment. Application environment could be production or non-production. Non-production includes testing, staging, development, pre-prod, all that comes into non-production. So that's another factor that you need to consider. Now, based on these factors, one more factor, endpoints type. Type basically means whether they are bring your own device, whether these endpoints are personal endpoints belonging to the employees of the organization, whether they are corporate domain joined, or work group. They belong to the corporate, they belong to the customer, or I'm saying they belong to your employer, but they are not corporate domain joined. They are into work groups. For example, Linux, by design, we don't join a Linux system to a domain, to an organization domain, right? So bring your own device, corporate domain joined, or work group. Production, non-production, geography of endpoint, whether they are in isolated network. For example, if your business is into manufacturing, then your OT devices, your SCADA systems, they will run in isolated network. What are the relationship? If two endpoints are interrelated or have no relationship in between, count of endpoint, and the type of endpoint, which is Windows, Mac, and Linux, as CrowdStrike supports as we speak today. So these are the factors that will affect the decision that how you will onboard endpoints. Factors affecting decision. Then comes that what are my methods through which I can onboard endpoints. So when it comes to onboarding methods, the onboarding methods are, and this will remain common for all EDR solutions, not only for CrowdStrike Falcon. When I talk about when I talk in general, it is for all the EDR solutions. So first onboarding method is direct onboarding. When I say direct onboarding basically means this is exactly what you guys are doing. You guys are performing direct onboarding, which means you're downloading the sensor from the console and installing it on the endpoint. Direct onboarding. Then comes using a software or application packaging solution. This is another method. You can use a software and application packaging solution such as SCCM, BigFix, Tanium, etc. I'm just taking some names which are quite familiar, quite common here. So you can use a software packaging solution. Using that solution, you can create a package. Nowadays, mobile device management solutions. So with these solutions, you can basically onboard the endpoint. You can create a package. Basically, you need the MSI of the solution, a installer file of the solution, and you create a package, and then you push that package to all the systems. And automatically, the installation happens in silent mode. Then you can configure whether installation will happen in silent mode in the backend while user is not aware of, or user work will be interrupted and user will need to leave the system for some time to have that installation complete. So using a software packaging application, that's another method. Then comes, so when it comes to direct onboarding has two methods, which is installing it via UI. So UI based installation or CLI based installation. I can install Falcon sensor using command line also. I don't need, I can just download it and then open command prompt, navigate to the directory where the Falcon sensor executable is copied. And from there, I can execute the command. And through the command line, I can provide the customer ID, I can provide installation token if required and deploy the sensor. Or I can use the UI, double click on that executable and it will open the UI and follow the instructions which are there. So UI based installation or CLI based installation. So we have direct onboarding and we have using a software application based solution. Now direct onboarding is good when you have limited endpoints, 1, 10, 50. You can use direct onboarding. But when you have 1,000 endpoints, and those endpoints are spread across locations, and you cannot keep up and running all the time to check whether it is happening or not and get the coordination done with those teams across geography, across time zone. You can use a software and packaging application. So that's one way. The other method is using a golden image. Now most of the production environment, when they build an endpoint, when an employee joins, the employee is provided with an endpoint. They're provided a laptop, and that laptop already has CrowdStrike Falcon sensor deployed and configured on it. So does it mean that IT team has manually done it? Probably yes or no. There is a high probability that they use an image, a golden image. It could be stored into a CD or DVD. It could be stored on a network, and through network they can push it, or it could be in a flash drive, a USB drive, and they can connect that USB drive to the laptop. They boot it from the laptop and then they deploy the operating system. That operating system contains the predefined or required softwares and applications that you need. So that's using a golden image, which is another option. So we can use a golden image to deploy Falcon sensor on the endpoints. Then comes, so we talked about Windows, Mac, and Linux. This is so Windows, Mac, and Linux all support software packaging and application. Uh, when it comes to Windows, it supports both UI and CLI based, but for Linux, it supports only CLI based installation. Then comes the another method that we can use, which is Software Center. They have renamed Software Center now. So you can do it from Software Center, Microsoft Store, or there is Windows Store, I believe. I need to check that name. They've recently renamed it. So Software Center, Microsoft Store, Windows Store, and this is only applicable for Windows client or server only. If it is Windows client and server, you can also push it through Software Center, Microsoft Center, or Windows Store. That's another method that you can use. Now, what about endpoints which are in work group? Because the endpoints which are in work group, you cannot push them through a software application package. In that case, you can use another method, which is group policy. However, this is once again applicable for Windows client and server only. So for Windows client and server operating system, we have UI based method, we have software application packaging method, we have golden image method, we have this method, and we have group policy method. For Linux, we have CLI based authentication, a CLI based installation. We have software packaging installation for Linux. Golden image is also possible because you can build the Linux system using the golden image. However, software center and group policy is not possible for Linux because they don't have these capabilities. So these are my onboarding methods which are available. I can pick and choose these onboarding method based on these factors, the factors that I have talked about there. So this is about onboarding method. Charles, you have any question?
Yes. Yes. So
Yeah,
my
please.
question is, if we're deploying it using the golden image, so how
Mhm.
can we apply the installation key?
In the golden image, when you deploy any software and application using golden image, you will not use the concept of installation key. Even if you are using the concept of installation key, then you will have a separate golden image for each installation key. Make sense? Or there
Uh,
is one method. See, golden image basically contains predefined software and application, which is pre-configured,
Correct.
So the moment you deploy the golden image on a blank endpoint, I'm saying a hardware that doesn't have an operating system on it,
Mhm.
all the softwares and applications will be installed. After the installation, you could have a post configuration task, which is to provide the directions to the endpoint. So after the endpoint is ready, then you can probably log into the endpoint, open command prompt, and you can register the sensor to its respective customer ID, or you can provide the installation token.
Okay, okay, I get it. So, okay, I get it. So another way we can do that is once we use the golden image to deploy it, then can we also use the group policy method to deploy the installation key? Is that possible?
Group policy you can always do, because in group policy, see, through group policy you also create a package. In that package you can supply everything. So basically, when you deploy a software and application, it requires certain inputs, certain parameters. So while creating a group policy, you can create a parameter file, and you can supply that parameter file along with the executable. So as and when that executable requires a parameter, the parameter file will supply that parameter, which is the same concept in software packaging application. Because software packaging application works for a wider scope, which includes Linux, Windows, Mac, and other operating system. And group policy would only support Windows operating system. And group policy will be at a lower scale. So when you have 100, 200, 500 systems, and if all of them are joined to the same corporate domain, you can create a group policy object at the domain controller at the AD level, and then you can push that group policy object to a specific group of devices. You can probably create an OU of all computers or devices and apply that group policy to that OU. So automatically, when those devices are rebooted or within a couple of minutes, those devices will receive that policy, and from that policy, they will receive the installation file and parameter file. That's how it happens.
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So,
Yes.
in past, we have deployed the CrowdStrike sensor on around 2000 Windows system using group policy with a script. So, in the script, we didn't include the installation token there. So, it got installed on the system where the GPU is applied. So, now after the deployment, how we can prevent the sensor from installing an unnecessary end user system?
How can we prevent what? Come
Prevent
again?
the how we
Prevent
can
the
prevent
sensor.
the sensor from installing an end user system in the future.
How you can prevent the sensor from
Yeah,
installing.
yeah.
Uh, I'm saying if the sensor is already there, it's there. And if it is not there, then user cannot install it by himself or herself, because user would require maintenance token and customer ID. See, sensor can be downloaded from, from internet also. Sensor is common. What differentiates is the registration, where you are registering that sensor to which cloud instance of CrowdStrike the sensor will submit or send the telemetry data to. That's what makes the difference. So
Actually, what
if you
is
have downloaded
happening?
the sensor, you can share it with anyone. They can use that sensor, but they will need a customer ID at a bare minimum to install the sensor. Because if you don't put the customer ID, then you won't be able to proceed with the installation. And if in that customer ID maintenance token is mandated, then also your installation will not be successful.
Okay, actually, what is happening? Like for remote user, they used to provide the uh, like installation token or the CID of the tenant in a mail. So these users are installing this on their personal system also. We use a SQL query for that and ngsim and find out the how many users have installing the sensor on the system. So we
See,
like to prevent it.
how can they install on the personal system when they don't have access to an installation token?
No, we didn't include the installation token on the script.
So which means the user is aware of the customer ID.
Yeah, we sent the CID to the on mail.
Okay, great. So the process is broken here. You should not reveal customer ID to your users. Second, why would a user onboard his or her personal device to a corporate security configuration? Because the moment a user onboards his or her personal device, have you not configured device policy that would block that user to use any USB drive? And since it's a personal system, user would want to use USB drive, and it will also restrict installation. It will also restrict browsing certain websites. So why would a user put unnecessarily restrictions on himself or herself by onboarding his or her personal device or endpoint into corporate configuration? I don't think so. I don't find a use case for it. And if it is done by mistake, that is where I talked about second factor authentication, which is maintenance token. So let's say the customer ID is known to the user, which they should not. However, if by any chance it is known to the user and you can't get it changed by CrowdStrike, by raising a support request and say, my customer ID is exposed, please change my customer ID. CrowdStrike cannot do that. It is created once and it is unique. So in that case, maintenance token comes into the picture. Let's mandate maintenance token so that they are not able to onboard any other endpoint or their personal endpoint into CrowdStrike console. And then unnecessarily waste one license of yours. You know the
Yeah.
cost of license. It's more than $100.
So after the
Okay.
install complete deployment in an environment, we can basically install the enable the installation token.
Uh, you can enable the installation token at any point in time. From that moment onward, all deployments would require installation token.
Yeah.
Deployments which already done would not get impacted.
Okay, got it.
Okay. All right, guys, let's move on. Okay, Shravan has a question. When dealing with Azure VM scale sets, where the VM count change dynamically based on load, what is the recommended approach to CrowdStrike sensor deployment? Okay, so when it comes to auto scaling, virtual machine scale sets, or scaling groups, where you have temporary infrastructure getting provisioned based on the application usage or application consumption, in all those scenarios, you also have a golden image concept. So in the virtual machine scale set, we use a golden image through which additional virtual machines are deployed. So you can have CrowdStrike Falcon sensor embedded into the golden image so that those virtual machines, while they get provisioned, they will have CrowdStrike Falcon sensor deployed on them, and they will also remain protected. However, this would include an additional management or maintenance factor into your picture, because once those virtual machines are decommissioned, the license that they have acquired will continue to remain occupied. So the admin will basically need to remove that license. That's the challenge with that approach. So what we do in that case, since virtual machine scale sets, auto scaling groups, or automation, it is temporary in nature. However, the same configuration has fixed instances also. In case of virtual machine scale sets or auto scaling group, you have a minimum number of servers which are running to that application stack. Always deploy security on those minimum number of servers, not the servers who will get provisioned and deprovisioned based on the load. That's the best practice in that scenario. Hope that answers your question, Siddharth. Shravan. Okay. Siddharth, I'm not
Raghu,
aware how to
Raghu,
create package solution golden image group policy process. I'm new in Endpoint. Can you help me how to? We cannot do that, Siddharth. In order to create golden image, in order to do group policy, we need to deploy Active Directory domain services, which is a lengthy task. So the the objective of this session is to understand the administration and as I said, in any production environment, this task will be done by the infra team. So you can either be part of infra team or you can be part of security team. The training is more focusing on security. So I would not be able to show you the group policy part or software packaging part because it would require an additional infrastructure to be built, which will also have a cost and licensing implications. However, if you want to see the documentation, I can share the documentation with you that basically shows you a step-by-step process of how to use group policy object to deploy Falcon sensor. Hope that answers
Okay,
your
Raghu.
question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Raghu, in regards with the AVDs and WVDs, which are dynamic in nature when user is going pull it out. So how we are going to onboard those kinds of devices?
Same answer as virtual machine
Same
scale
answer,
set.
right? Yeah,
Same
sure,
answer.
sure.
Is
Got
in
it.
case of
Thanks.
Azure Virtual Desktop or Amazon Workspaces, you have a minimum capacity that you define. So in
Sure.
any application, in any host pool, you have a minimum number of session hosts which are running. Have those session hosts configured with CrowdStrike Falcon sensor and any additional session host that gets deployed as part of scaling policies because it's temporary in nature. So since it is
Yes.
temporary in nature, you can avoid putting EDR solution on it. However, if you are working in a highly regulated environment like banking, finances, manufacturing, oil and gas, aviation, aerospace, then there may be a probability that you cannot leave a system unattended, unprotected even for 5 minutes. So in that case,
Yeah.
you will need to have it deployed through. You will need to have that deployed through the. I'm saying you will need to have Falcon sensor go on it, and once they are decommissioned, obviously their status in the console will show as inactive. I'm saying it will not be active, and then your admins will need to remove them manually, decommission them manually, or your admins can create a script, and with that script they can execute that script using automation, CrowdStrike automation. You can create a decommissioning script, and you can execute that script. Uh, I'm say you can execute that script based on certain prefix. So when additional VMs are getting deployed, their name, you don't provide the name. It comes from the configuration. So probably there's a prefix which is there that defines that it's a session host versus a typical virtual machine in Azure. So you can create a Falcon automation script that will look for all devices which are currently showing as not active, plus have their name, plus have this prefix in their name. And when this matches, the CrowdStrike query language will pick up all those devices and decommission it. That way you can manage that part.
And how about doing this way? Just a workaround I'm thinking about. If we have a dynamic host naming or dynamic uh, IP allocation. So in that
Mm.
scenario, since CrowdStrike will count if endpoint stays for a month, then only licensing will be done. So in that scenario, we can save the
No,
cost.
no. Licensing, as soon as the endpoint is onboarded, license is taken.
Okay,
How can you
got it.
say that the license cost will only apply when the endpoint remains there for a month? No, that CrowdStrike will decide at the time of renewal and will check how many endpoints were up and running throughout the year and how many of them ran, what was the average duration average life duration of those endpoint, and accordingly CrowdStrike will provide the licensing quotation to you, renewal quotation to you. So renewal is separate. Here we are talking about security because the question was related to security, that I have certain endpoints in my environment which are temporary in nature, which are part of VDI infrastructure, or which are part of my scaling infrastructure. How will I protect those endpoints? That was the question.
I got you. That
Yeah.
is crisp and clear.
Okay.
Thanks, Rifu.
Great. I'll take the last question and then I'll move on, guys, and I'll keep a separate, time for question and answer. Otherwise, we'll not be able to move. Can we park these specific? Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. That let's continue with the deployment so that the participants who are from across geography, they can probably call it a day, or they can start their day, because in India it's Saturday and we are in the morning time, but for other participants that may have some work. So we will take these questions after we are done with this session. All right, so we talked about onboarding method. Now we will focus on this onboarding method. I'll also can show you a demonstration of CLI based onboarding method, but let's just stick to UI based installation. As I said, at any point in time, since you are security admin or CrowdStrike admin, you will not be expected to know the software packaging part, golden image part, or group policy part, because that is the responsibility of infrastructure team, Wintel and Linux team, and they are always a separate team from security. You cannot be one man army doing everything. That only happens in training or non-production environment. Okay, so let's move on. Now, when it comes to, so I talked about factors affecting decision, I talked about onboarding methods. Now, we also need to know system requirements. System requirements before you install or deploy a sensor on an endpoint. So what are my system requirements? When I say system requirements, I'm talking about hardware requirement. Minimum hardware requirement. What is the minimum hardware that must be available on an endpoint in order to qualify for sensor installation? Hardware requirement. Then comes software requirements, network requirements. Are there, so what kind of software or software or OS requirement, let's say. Software basically means OS requirements. Then network requirements, that whether the endpoint on which I'm deploying the sensor requires certain network traffic allowed for inbound and outbound, from inbound and outbound perspective. That's network requirement. And then comes specific requirements. Specific requirements are basically for specific environments like IoT or OT environments, or isolated systems, or systems with additional EDR, a system that already has an EDR solution on it. For example, you're trying to onboard CrowdStrike on an endpoint which has McAfee mVision, which has Cortex XDR already running on it. So there is probably a conflict between both security solution because they do the same work. So how do you take care of that part, right? So additional systems with additional EDR, or any other use case that comes to your mind, which is specific requirements, which are not common for all corporates. They are specific to a customer. So let's talk about those specific requirements. Now for that, I will share the documentation with you. The documentation contains all the information. The documentation will be, okay, I'll share it right away with you actually from Microsoft Teams. So the documentation contains all the information about hardware requirement, software requirement, network requirement, specific requirement. It contains all the information. However, I'll show you where that document is. So what we need to do, CrowdStrike documentation is not available on public network, which is on internet. They are restricted to CrowdStrike customers only. So how do we have access to CrowdStrike documentation? From the console, we need to click on three horizontal lines that opens a pop-up. Over here under support and resources, at the bottom, you will see an option that reads support and resources. Click on it, and then you see documentation portal. Now there are two documentation here, documentation portal and documentation. Which portal should you be using? You should be using documentation portal because this is a new UI. It contains documentation similar to what is there on the previous portal, but this is what they are going to continue with, and this will get deprecated. So I'll go with documentation portal beta. Now on this documentation portal, you can search for CrowdStrike documentation. You have some options also, for example, endpoint security, Falcon management, sensor deployment and maintenance. Here you can search for it. So what are we trying to do? We are trying to onboard endpoint. So I can search with onboard endpoint. So when I say onboard endpoints, based on what I searched for, it will show me the options, the results. Now, when I search for this, at the bottom, you see an option that says that has the information which is here. Sensor on Windows, sensor deployment and maintenance, and then Windows. So I can click on this. It will take me to the documentation. Now on the left, you see the headline of the documentation is sensor deployment and maintenance. And then it provides you all the information. Sensor deployment and maintenance for Windows, for Mac, and for legacy OS, including Linux, Kubernetes, and cloud workloads, mobile workloads, Chrome OS, as well as additional deployment help. So this contains all the information. I'll share the URL with you in the chat window. You all can directly type the URL in a browser tab in the same browser window where you are already logged into CrowdStrike console. Now here we see all the information. So let's get started. The first thing is cloud IP addresses and FQDN. The other day in the previous session, I had a question from a participant that what if my environment, what if my business doesn't allow unrestricted access to internet on port 443? What if there is a restriction in my business? In that case, I asked you to get your perimeter, network perimeter team, or get some IP addresses and FQDN whitelisted for CrowdStrike so that endpoints can communicate with CrowdStrike cloud instance. And that information is available here. So here you can see these are the IP addresses for US1, depending on where your CrowdStrike console is. For example, my CrowdStrike console is falcon.us-2. So I will need to go to us.-2. There I will get all the information over here, us.-2. So this is the public DNS name that will need to be whitelisted. Plus these are the IP addresses that needs to be whitelisted for IPv4. If your environment uses IPv6, then these are the IPv6 IP addresses that needs to be whitelisted, right? So if you whitelist all of these IP addresses and domain name, which is the DNS name, then your endpoints will be able to communicate with Falcon sensor. Both incoming and outgoing traffic will be whitelisted into the firewall. Is everyone with me on this?
Yes, sir. Do we have to whitelist these on firewall, right?
Firewall. I'm saying perimeter device. The device which is configured to drop the packet, drop the traffic, which is outbound to CrowdStrike on 443, because the sensor will communicate with its cloud instance on 443 port. So if you have not configured unrestricted access on 443, then this is what you need to do. And these are the DNS name or the console URL that needs to be whitelisted in the perimeter firewall so that your admins can actually access the console. So by default, it is falcon.us-2.crowdstrike.com, but you have two additional URLs also. And these are the corresponding IP addresses for these URLs.
So we need these all three term servers and then LFO download and then LFO upload. All these three sections IPs. Yeah.
All the sections. Because if you don't do all of them, then it will have partial behavior. Some capabilities will be restricted. See, at the end of the day, you are using multiple modules from CrowdStrike. Some modules have heavy upload and download. For example, NGC module, it collects log. As in when logs are generated on the endpoints, they need to be sent. So it has heavy upload capability. So you will need to make sure that you whitelist all the URLs and all the public IPs. And even after whitelisting them, if there is any challenge or any issue that you are facing, then you can always raise a support request to CrowdStrike, and they will probably check. They will work with your network team of the firewall team or the network security team, and they will do the packet tracing to identify if there is any packet which is getting lost in transit because of any restriction at CrowdStrike end or any restriction at your network end. So this is more of an exercise that needs to be done. Okay, let's move on. That's exactly what we are doing, Soumya. We are going to, so before we onboard the EDR, any endpoint, we first need to understand the architectural aspects of it, the system requirements, network requirements, and the other requirements. So that when you go back to a production environment, you don't blindly log into a server and start to onboard it. You will first make sure that these requirements are met, because in production we perform endpoint onboarding in a project or phases approach. Okay, so that's cloud-based IP systems. Then comes, let's forget about sensor update policies and other things that I will talk about once we have endpoints onboarded. Directly come to Windows. Now let's talk about Falcon sensor for Windows. So when it comes to Falcon sensor for Windows, you will first need to know what all supported operating systems from Windows are there on whom you can deploy Falcon sensor. Now here you can see it supports 64-bit Windows Server OSs, which includes Server Core, Server 25. Now what is the difference between Core and Server 2025? Core will not have GUI on it. It is a pure play command prompt through which you will manage, similar to Linux. And Server 2025 is GUI. It supports this version. Then comes other server 22, server 2022, 2022, 2019. You can see the legacy part also. Server 2012 R2 is already out of support. It's already no security patches are coming from Microsoft. It's already out of extended support also. But CrowdStrike still supports it. Right? Then comes there is a storage server from Windows. There's a server 2012. CrowdStrike even supports legacy operating systems. Server 2000 R2 Service Pack 1. It still supports it. So these are the server operating system that CrowdStrike support. So why this information is important? If you have not looked into this information, what if you try to onboard an operating system which CrowdStrike doesn't support, and customer has already purchased license for it? Then there is a tough situation. So we want to avoid that situation, and hence we want to plan everything well in advance for our production environment. Okay, this is the server. Then comes desktop. Now, when it comes to desktop, it supports Windows 11. These are the versions of Windows 11. It supports almost all the versions. All Windows 11 versions you can see, all Windows 10. It supports Windows 7 also, right? And then Windows 7. You will notice that it doesn't support Windows 8 here, because before Windows 10, there used to be Windows 8 also. After Windows 7, they released Windows Vista. Vista had significant interface issues, performance issues, and Microsoft was quick to rename Vista as Windows 8 by making certain amendments to it, improvements to it. So Windows 8 is not here. 7 is here, 10 and 11 is here. Okay. So these are the operating systems. Now, what operating systems are not supported? It says unsupported features on ARM64 host. So some features are not supported. These are unsupported Windows operating systems. You can see all other Windows OS are unsupported, including but not limited to. Now, this list contains all unsupported operating systems. Some Windows 10 64-bit versions are not supported, which are quite older, version 1709, which nobody uses today. Similarly, all 32-bit versions of Windows 10 not in the list. It doesn't support 32-bit version, only 64-bit version. All versions of Windows 8 and Windows 8.1 are not supported. They have decided not to support this because this version was nothing but Windows Vista and it had issues. So CrowdStrike decided not to support this version at all. So it doesn't support this version. Then says Windows 10 and 11 running in S mode for US Government 1 and Government 2 customers. So if the government is also using CrowdStrike services, then government gets a separate operating system for them. So the operating system in S mode is not supported. S stands for security. So when Microsoft supplies the machines to the government of a country, they build it with a separate security layer, which is known as S layer. So it is not supported because it is already kernel mode security. Okay, so these are not supported. Then you also need to make sure that these services should be up and running on your host. If these services are not there, up and running, then you may face a challenge in deploying sensors. It says these services must be installed and running. So these services must be installed and running. Then comes network protocol. The network protocol version on your operating system must support TLS 1.2 and above. If it supports legacy network protocol, then you will not be able to onboard CrowdStrike sensor because CrowdStrike only supports TLS 1.2 and above. TLS stands for Transport Layer Security. This will ensure that the data that CrowdStrike Falcon sensor is sending to its CrowdStrike cloud instance is protected in transit, which is known as encryption in transit. So these are additional services that needs to be enabled. So you can see then comes the certificate. It also requires certain certificates. If these certificates are not present, you may see network request on port 80 locations other than CrowdStrike Cloud. So you need to make sure that you need to have all of this. Then language. Now, what if you are in, what if you are in Africa and there is a regional language that you speak and you want CrowdStrike Falcon sensor in that language? It doesn't support. It supports English, Chinese, French, German. These are the language that Falcon sensor supports. So if your operating system is not using these language, if your keyboard doesn't support this language layout, then Falcon sensor will also have trouble. Then comes networking requirements, internet access. You should have internet access on your endpoint because without internet access, your endpoint will not be able to communicate or establish connectivity with Falcon Cloud instance. So it says host must connect to CrowdStrike Cloud on port 443 during initial installation. So it will try to, because you will supply the customer ID, it will basically use that customer ID to communicate with your cloud instance. And if internet is not working, then the installation will fail. If an environment restricts internet access, allow traffic to CrowdStrike cloud IPs and IP addresses and FQDNs, which I've shown you before. You must allow the cloud that has CID that the installer should connect for. Okay. Then comes allow additional network requirements from domain controllers. If you're trying to deploy CrowdStrike Falcon sensor on a domain controller, Active Directory domain services, then some additional ports must be enabled from there. So all this information is very important that you need to see. Then validate certificate for MFA. If you are using multi-factor authentication, then you need to have these certificates available in your environment. So you can see these are the certificates from Microsoft and digicert.com. Avoid interface with certification pinning. Allow TLS traffic, which is by default allowed everywhere, except for isolated environment like OT devices. There you don't allow TLS traffic. So all of this, these are the domains. All the information is there. Okay. So once you satisfy all of these prerequisites, which is hardware requirement, software requirement, and network requirement, then comes installing the sensor, Falcon sensor on the endpoint, or onboarding the endpoint into Falcon console. So let's get started with the installation. So we have two types of installation. It says in most cases, you can install the Falcon sensor for Windows using a manual GUI installation or an automated command line installation. So let's look at the manual installation. So first we see manual installation, then you see command line installation also. It's very simple. You just need to, so I'll talk about automatic installation also. Let's first go to the manual installation. How are we manually installing it? It says download the sensor installer from host setup and management, deploy and sensor downloads. So we basically need to navigate to host setup and management. Then we need to navigate to deploy, and under deploy we have sensor downloads. Over here it will show you all the available sensor versions for your respective host. You will need to pick and choose the right version, and you will need to download it on the host, or you can download it on a file server, and from there host can receive it, or the host user can actually copy it from the file server. So we have all platforms, which is Windows, Mac, and Linux. Since we are doing it for Windows, I'll select Windows. Now over here we have two Falcon sensors, Windows 7.3.4 20610, and you can see the older version of it also. So these are all the versions which are available. This is the most recent version, which is January 22, 2026. Now I never recommend to go with the I never recommend to go with the most recent version, because most recent version may have certain trouble, and that has been evident in the last 2 years, because of certain outages that happened at CrowdStrike. So I would suggest you to go with N-1, which is N-1 here, January 2026, because the latest one is March 10th, which is a couple of days before. I'm saying this week itself, they have come up with a newer version. So we'll go with this version then, January 22 to 2026, which is N-1. This is the version that we will go with. Okay, so let's go ahead and deploy. Let's go ahead and onboard the sensor. I'll give you a quick demo. If you have already onboarded your endpoint, well and good. If you have not, then you can come with me. You can onboard it with me, or you can just watch me how I do it so that you understand the process. Okay, so I log into let's go. So let's log into AWS console. There I will provision an instance, and I will show you how to quickly onboard that instance into CrowdStrike. And that's where you will understand the token part also.
For subversion also we will
All of you
consider
log
this
into your
N-1.
respective. Which one?
If we are talking about the subversion, so we are also taking N-1 or how?
Yeah, this is so these are N-1. All of them are N-1. Your latest is version 7.3.4. 7.3.3 is N-1. Now, from these N-1, I can either go with this version or this version. See, the current is 7.3.4, and so the latest is 7.3.4, and N-1 is 7.3.3, N-2 is this, N-3 is this. So that's totally your choice, what you want to go. As per the best practices, we go with N-1 version. Since you're deploying it today, you are concerned about these version numbers. Once the endpoint is onboarded, then we will have a policy that you will all configure, that I'll talk about probably tomorrow, which is sensor update policy. So I'll create a policy that will automatically update the sensor to a specific version as and when new updates are available from CrowdStrike. Okay.
And what about this 20505? What is this type of this means? How we can say what type of this version is this 20505 ending with last?
This is N-1.
Yeah, this is the N-1. There is a 7.33. 33 I can understand N-1. Then after that there is a 20505. What is that? This is also a version number.
These are all version numbers.
Okay.
These are all version numbers. If there are two 7.3, 7.33, then you will look the last 5 digits and see which one is higher or lower. Since only one 7.33 is there, this is N-1, this is N-2. However, if you want to see out of these two, then you can check the number. 7.3.2 is common, 2.405, 2.403. So obviously out of these two, 4.5 is the latest, and 4.3 is the previous one.
Okay, so in that case, n minus 1, 403 we will consider for the production environment, correct?
No. N minus 1 will always be 505 because the latest is already outside of this window, which is 7.3.4. N means latest, minus 1 means the
Okay.
previous to latest. So previous to 7.3.4 is 7.3.3. So this is N minus
Okay.
1 basically. Okay.